Hello, everybody, and welcome back to DJ Tutorials. This is the LuxCore Crash Course Volumes, Materials, and Shading tutorial. If you haven't yet, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That really helps me out. And also, if you haven't yet, jump on to the Discord server that has been launched recently. If you have any questions or if you'd like to talk to me personally or anything like that, you can jump on there. So let's go ahead and jump into Blender here. And for those of you who don't really know what volumes are basically ways that you can shade a object to show the inside of an object, or if it's smoke, or you have some sort of atmospheric that you want to show with some like color absorption or anything like that. And there's a couple ways to do that, but before we get into the details, let's go ahead and jump into LuxCore here. So render engine to LuxCore. And we're actually going to get rid of this cube here. And I'm just going to set up a basic plane. And we're going to create a session that you can use to basically test out these different methods and just look at what works for you on your particular scene or whatever it is like that. But you really need to look at a couple different objects before you can really see how the shading is working and how the materials are being applied with these types of volumes. And the shape really will change how it looks. It's not like a regular PBR material. There are a lot of things about volumes that you really should be aware of how it changes based on the geometry of your particular object. So the first thing we're going to add is a simple Suzanne or monkey head. So go into the mesh here, add the monkey, and I'm going to go ahead and also split the panel here, and I'm going to turn on the screencast keys. So let's do that there. And I'm going to go to the 3 mode or the side mode here by hitting 3. And I'm just going to move Suzanne up a little bit to sort of rest on the ground plane here that we created. I'm going to hit Control 3 to just subdivide it, right click, and shade smooth. Now, the next thing that I'm going to be adding here is actually a downloadable file that you can get from the LuxCore website. And it's their shading sort of like ball tester object that they have. So I'm going to copy it from a file that I have, and I'm going to just paste it here. And it's really small right there. We're going to scale this sucker up. And we're going to move it up to about there. And we're just going to grab it and move it. Actually, we'll just move it right here. Okay. So we have this little tester ball. You can grab the one that's from Blender also. Any of these really helps to see what the materials are because it shows a more complicated sort of um, geometry so that you can see how the materials are being shaded onto that particular object. So that's a really nice one there. And also the other one that I want to do, because we're using volumes here, is we're going to create a cube. We're going to move it up, and we're going to scale it on X by 0.05. So we're going to make this very thin sort of like pane of glass here. And move it right there. And we're also going to add a bevel. So if we go here to the modifiers, and we add a little bit of a bevel here, I'm going to apply the scale. So Control A, apply scale. And for the amount, we're just going to do something like this. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to create a quick material that we're going to link that material to these other objects. That way, when we make the adjustments to one of these, it adjusts all of them, and we can see how this effect is being applied to these different objects here. So if we go up here to the editor type right here, and we go to LuxCore material nodes, remember that there's shader editor and LuxCore material nodes. Shader editor is the regular cycles and Eevee, and then LuxCore material nodes is for LuxCore. So we're going to click on that. We're going to move this over, and there's nothing in here yet. Make sure that you have Suzanne selected. And so we're just going to select this very simple glass shader right here. That way, we just start off with something very easy and simple to begin with. And I'll be covering glass in a lot more detail in a later tutorial, but for this one, we're just going to use this glass shader. So we click on this one here, and now we have a material, and it's just called material 1, and we're just going to call this glass. And hold down Shift. We're going to select these and then reselect our monkey head here. Hit Control L, and then we're going to make links to materials. So if I click on these other materials here, you can see that they all have glass. I'm actually going to also select this little object right here. So I'm going to select these again, select this one, and then select the monkey head and hit Control L, link materials. And now if we take a look at this in the rendered view, we can see that they are all glass. So pretty much from this point, we're ready to begin. I'm going to take this, this lamp right here, and I'm going to pull it down to about here. I'm going to change the lighting here to power, and that's going to give us a little bit more of a expected look from cycles. And I'll be covering lighting in another tutorial as well in a lot more detail, but basically just pull that over so it kind of shines over these objects a little bit differently. And we'll be moving this around as we look at these volumes. So let's select our object here, and you can pretty much select any of these because the materials are linked. And if we go over here, we see we have the glass material, and we're not really going to do anything with that. What we want to do is we want to add a interior volume. And what we're going to do here is we're not actually going to click this button here. And this, if you click it, it will make a new volume, but it's going to open up in another sort of like panel. And I really don't want to do that. I want to show you an easy way that you can just add some volume materials. What we're actually going to do also with the viewport here, it's denoising. As you can see, it's very, very clean. We're going to go over to the render settings here. We're going to go down to the viewport render, and we're just going to click off this denoiser. It helps save some of the CPU processing, and it just helps things get moving a little bit faster. So let's go ahead and add a material, sorry, a volume here. And there's a couple different to choose from, and we're going to go through all of these. So we're going to first go to the clear volume. And you're going to take this and you're going to put that right into the interior volume. Do not put into the exterior volume. And right away you can see that nothing really happens. So let's go ahead and change the absorption color right here. And now you can see that there's a change. So basically what this does is whatever the volume basically is changing the color. It's changing the color of your object inside depending on what the geometry is. So the thicker areas are going to be having more of that color, and the thinner areas like the ears here is going to have more of the clear transmission glass material. And if we look at the ball over here, you can see that it's done a little bit differently. And if we look at the glass, and this is very important if you're doing anything with acrylic or certain types of glass, as you move around the object, you can see that at the edge here, it's very vivid, that color. And as you move to the side, it's not so obvious. So an acrylic usually will have a green edge or something like that. So you might want to do something like this. And that's going to create a volume sort of look there, or the acrylic sort of look there. And this might be a little bit too strong for you, so you could change the color, to something like this, but it's still kind of there. And really what it is that you want to change is the absorption right here, the absorption depth. If you change this to like a 10, you can see that it's a lot less obvious and it's just kind of there. You can see right here. And if we look at the pane of glass right here again, as we move around to the side, you can see that it's not as obvious as it was before. If we change this to a 5, or if we change this to a 2, you can see that it becomes more and more visible. And the same thing with our LuxCore ball over here. If we change the absorption, let's say to a 0.1, you can see that it's very, very uh, green now. And this is basically how you can create some like clear plastics and things like that. So this is really, really great for doing glass or any sort of plastic or something like that that has some kind of translucency kind of to it. And it helps to add a layer of realism to your object. Now, you can throw in textures and stuff like that. This is a crash course, so I'm not going to show you some more advanced ways of doing that, but this is a way that you can create a sort of like volume glass shading. The next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to add a material, and we're going to add a matte, or actually let's do a glossy translucent. This is going to have a lot of stuff in here, and I don't want to lose anybody. So let's disconnect the glass material, move it over here, and let's take this glossy and throw it right in here. And basically, what you're getting is more of like a more solid kind of plastic, or even like you could do this for shading of skin or something like that if you really want to. I would say that you want to use a different method, but if you're doing like a really quick character design that's more cartoony, you could use this for subsurface scattering or something like that. You could change this to like a flesh tone or something like that, and you get this kind of effect here. And if we take this lamp and we move it right to the other side here, you can really tell how the volume is affecting the way that this is being shaded. So if we look at this side here, you can see that it's more of that white. And if we change the diffuse here, we can change this to a blue or something like that. And if we go to the other side, you could see what the absorption volume is. And if you change the absorption depth here again, you get a different effect on how the volume is being rendered. This is also a cool way to do any sort of like paper effects or anything like that. Like if you have sort of like a dojo or something with paper or something, you can make a volume effect like this with the panes of, I don't know if it's glass or paper or whatever it is, but you could do that kind of effect here. So you can play with these and get a lot of different effects. One thing that I will note here is that your diffuse color, you'll want to be careful with what you choose because it does change the way that this looks. And where you can control the transmission or the amount that you're seeing of this clear volume here, this transmission, if you go down all the way to the black here, there is no transmission. And then if you go all the way up to white, you're getting a full transmission and it's like pretty much see-through, something like that. And if we take this absorption depth here and we change this to a 0.1, you can see that it has a particularly different effect, etc. The other thing I'm going to talk about right here is the IOR. So this is the index of refraction. And if you hover over it, it kind of tells you sort of some things that you can choose. So 1.5 for glass, 1.3 for water, 1.0 for air. So if you change this value here, you can see how it affects the absorption in different ways, and you could play with that to get your material volume shaded the way that you'd like it to be seen. Now, the other thing that you could add here is the matte translucent, which really does the same thing as the glossy, except for that it's matted. So, it's kind of self explanatory there. Most of the same things work exactly the same, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, one thing about the glossy translucent material that I want to point out is if you're doing trees, like leaves and stuff like that, you'll want to, if it's just a flat plane that's been sort of like changed in shape to make a leaf shape, you'll want to hit this double-sided button right here, which will allow you to render that in a different way that would be particularly useful for doing leaves and things like that. Most of the stuff in here you could just play with to see what it does. It's a very basic shader for the most part. The only things that are really different from the Disney material node that I covered in a previous tutorial, and this one is just a couple of these things here with the absorption, the diffuse color, transmission color, which of course, like I said, it has to do with how the thing is being, how the volume is being used here. And like with all of these, you can always throw a black and white image or create a different type of texture that you can pipe into here and change how it's being displayed across the object there. So that's pretty much going to be it for the clear volume. And the next thing that we're going to be doing here, and what we'll do is we'll actually keep the glossy translucent. We're going to take the clear volume and put it over here. And we're just going to add another volume. We're going to go to homogeneous. Now, with homogeneous, the thing about homogeneous volume is it's really useful for doing subsurface scattering for skin tones and things like that. So we're going to go ahead and choose a skin tone, and we'll use something like that. I mean, it's not perfect or anything, but I don't want to use just the traditional, tan color. So we'll do like a darker brown value there. And the transmission color, obviously, the same as before, you can choose to make it completely transmission or translucent, or you can make it none at all, which would make it more of uh, the Disney shader on how it handles reflections and things like that. We're going to take the transmission color, we're going to put it at about a gray value here. And for the absorption, we're going to change that to more of a sort of like internal fleshy reddish color like this. Okay. And you can see that you're now starting to see more of what you would expect to see in sort of like skin and things like that. So if we take this, actually, let's just take the light here and we'll move it over here. You can see how that's being affected right in here. Now the scattering right here, we're going to move this scattering down to 0. When you do that, you can see that you're now starting to see a lot more of that internal volume, subsurface scattering showing up inside of the object. So if you don't like the scattering at a 1, because it seems like the only thing you're getting is just a couple things that you're showing the sort of like internal bits and stuff like that for the subsurface scattering, you can take the scattering scale, put it down to like a 0.25. You could throw an image in here to change how this is working, anything like that to kind of control how the scattering is working. And basically with the scattering, just consider it like it's diluting the subsurface scattering of it a bit more. So if you set this to a 5 or something like that, you can see that it's hardly even visible, if at all. You change this to a 2, it's just coming back right in here. And then if you change this to a 1, it's back to where we were, and you can see that pink area around the eye section there. And if we look at the ball here, if we take this and move it more over here, and I'm actually going to hide this part on the inside and bring the light a little bit closer so we can see. So you can see that on this ball here, now that I got rid of the internal bit, you can actually see through that section there. And if we take the scattering scale and we put it down to 0, like we did before, you can see that it's even more of that sort of like fleshy bit underneath there. So if you're doing skin tones or you're doing anything that's like an organic object or a mushroom or something like that, this is the kind of volume that you want to use. Now you can turn on multi-scattering if you want. I've found that it doesn't make that much of a difference, and sometimes it can increase your render times by quite a bit. So it'll be really up to you if you want to use this multi-scattering or not, as with pretty much any of this. And of course, the absorption depth does the exact same thing. So if you, as the clear volume shader that we had here, so if you put that up to a 5, you can see that it's a little pinkish right here, but it's not really as visible. And if we set this at a 2 or something like that, you can see that now it's becoming more of that sort of like flesh tone or underside of the flesh tone effect. Let's pull this over to, or the lighting here, let's pull it over to the plane so we can see how this one is functioning. And you can see here that you can sort of like see how this works a little bit easier with the plane, because it's not as complex. And this is why I said you want to really have a couple of these here when you're playing with different materials, because you can see how it's being affected on each of these different objects based on its geometry. So if I take the, sorry, not clear volume here, let's go back to the homogeneous volume here. And we take the scattering scale and let's put it up to a 1. And the absorption depth, let's put that to a 0.25. And let's actually pull this a little bit closer right over here. So you can see there that it's a lot more obvious what's happening. So we have this more reddish area here, and then down over here it kind of like evens out to more of the translucent material that we have right up here. And if we take the scattering and we put it down to a 0.25 and the absorption, let's put that up to a 1, you can see the effect that is happening there. Okay? So the other thing that I haven't really talked about too much is this right here, the asymmetry. So pretty much, I would say you want to start or leave this at a 0, but you can decide how the volume is actually being, um, like the rays are going through it and being split off. So if you wanted to take this to a 0.5, you can see that it has a different effect here. The green minus point, or I put a -1, but minus 0.5. You can change how basically the colors that are shooting through this object, whether it's what's called a back scatter or a forward sort of direction scatter, This sort of stuff gets a little bit more into the advanced territory, and I would say for right now, really you just want to stay at around a 0. So let's go ahead and remove this here. And what we're going to use now is the heterogeneous. So if you go to volume, click on heterogeneous and take that and put that into the interior volume, we're going to have a little bit of a different effect. And to really show how this works, because this is best for clouds and things like that, we're going to remove this material here. We're going to put this right over here with the rest of these. And we're going to add a material, and it's going to be the null or transparent. So this is basically going to make the outside transparent, but the inside we'll be able to see. For the ground, I'm actually going to add a proper Disney material here, and I'm going to make this black just so that we can see this a little bit easier. I'm going to click on Suzanne here and pull the lamp a little bit over this way. And basically how this works here for the heterogeneous volume is that if you're doing sort of like an environmental effect where you have a scattering or something like that, what you want to do is use this. So if you have like a fog in the air or something like that, or you want to make clouds or you have a smoke effect, this is really what you're going to want to use. And I'll show you how to create a proper fire shader and smoke shader like I showed in the intro of this particular tutorial a little bit later on. But basically, what you want to do here is when you add it, just turn on the auto step settings because this really helps a lot. And it will require a domain when you have a smoke simulation or something like that. But don't worry about that right now. But auto step settings are really, really great. And multi scattering, you're going to keep that off for now. So of course the same things apply as we've already talked about with the others. So the absorption right here, it works pretty much the same way. You can change the color, you can change the how fast it absorbs to that color. You can put a 10 in here and see what that does. Let's try a 2.5. Something like that, and you can see how the color gradually changes over time. If we take a look at our plane here and we go to the side, you can see that it's darker there than it is here. And you can see how the shape of this, how the geometry is, it's more sort of concentrated in the center there than on the ears, as we saw before. And with the ball, you can see how it's changed there as well. Now, the next thing that you're seeing here is this scattering, and the scattering is going to work a little bit differently than we've seen before. So if you take the scattering scale here, you set that to a 10 or something like that, you can see that it becomes more of like a solid object. So it's basically the denseness of the cloud effect that's on the inside here. And if you change this to a, let's say, zero point 0.1, it's a lot less dense, and you're seeing more of that absorption inside the center there. And if we change this, let's say to a black or something like that, you can see how the absorption is working. Let's actually change this to, let's say, a 50. And you can see that it's a little bit less noticeable there. It's not as thick with this black here. And since this is more of an air, let's change the IOR to a 1. And how it's all being calculated just, changes a bit depending on all of these settings here. So the asymmetry here, basically the same thing. You can play with these if you want, but I would recommend as a beginner, just keep these all at 0. Don't worry too much about this. Now, a really cool thing that you can do, and I'm just going to show you very, very briefly how this can work. Even without a smoke simulation, you can create some really cool effects with the scattering. So if I go in here, and let's add, let's say, a texture, and we're going to add, actually, Blender. We're going to go to Voronoi here. And we're going to view through this with Control Shift left click. And you can see that there's sort of this shape here. And what I want to change this to, I think, is it Minkowski? Let's just use this for now. And for the noise size, we're going to make this more like, let's do like this. And if we take that and we throw that through a color ramp and put that into the scattering the scattering scale here and view back through this material, we can actually change the effect of the inside of this object. Now it's not as obvious here, and what I can do here is I can actually add a math node and a multiply and make this, let's say, 150. And you can see there that what we've done, if I pull this black up, let's actually pull this over, and maybe let's try 100. You can see that if you look over here at the plane, I've created sort of a volume effect that's removed certain sections but made other sections a lot thicker. And you can see that how that works with the different volumes here. So you can see that it's not 100% a smoky object, that there's sort of different patterns on the inside in a three-dimensional sense. So you can play with that by throwing a color ramp into any sort of image texture or a procedural like this Blender Voronoi here or whatever you want. You can even throw a color ramp or throw this into a color ramp, and let's say make this a red and then make this a blue. And for the scattering color right here, you can change the whole color into a, orange or a blue or whatever. You can take this color ramp and put that into the scattering and basically change and control how the colors of that smoke on the inside is being handled. So pretty fun, really, really cool stuff you can do with that. Let's go ahead and remove all of this. And we're just going to take all this and we're going to move all this down over here. So we're getting a little bit crazy here with all of our nodes, but it's good. This is good stuff. And we'll take this, we'll deselect, and we'll put this down here. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to change this to volumes. Okay. And we're actually going to hit this little shield here. So we're going to make a fake user. Just to save it, I'm going to hit this little minus. And I'm going to go back to the 3D mode, select these objects again, select my monkey head here, and I'm just going to click on the Disney one again just to make a new material, and we'll just call this base or something like that. And keep the color white, and we'll take the roughness down. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to do a environmental effect for the whole scene. So if we go back to the rendered view, and we hit, let's link these again. So select all of these, click the monkey head again, Control L, link materials. Okay. So now we have this floor and we have these three objects. And what we're going to do here is we're actually going to go to the world settings and we're going to add some volume to the entire world. So this is how you do things like fog effects, or if you want to make a volume absorption where over the distance of your particular scene it changes colors or it gets darker or anything like that, this is how you do it. So you go over here to the world properties, go down to where it says volume. And what we're going to do right here is we're actually going to change this. We're going to split this panel, and there's a reason for that. So we're going to go here to volume. We're going to click new, and it's called world volume. And what you need to do is right here, you need to go to this volume right here, LuxCore volume nodes. Okay. Then right here, you're going to click on world volume. And then from here, we can change a bunch of stuff. So right now it's just a clear volume, and we can change the absorption here to a black. You can see what just happened there. Change the absorption distance to, let's say, 5,000 or 500 or 5,000 or whatever. And you can see that how this is working is it's basically like a nighttime scene where you might have a street post or something like that, and the scene gets darker over the distance, and you can change the distance here. So if you wanted it to get really dark really fast, maybe a 50, but I think you have to make your light source here pretty crazy. Let's try 150 instead. So you can see that it drops off really, really quick, this volume absorption. You could change this color too. So if we go to a red or a brown or anything like that, you can actually change the overall absorption by changing that color. But Usually people want to do like a really cool drop off effect like that for nighttime scenes or inside of a cave or something like that. Let's actually change this to a 500 again. And so that's basically what the absorption is going to do there. And we're going to take this and we're going to remove this and we're going to add one of our other ones that we've been looking at. So let's go to add volume and we're going to add the heterogeneous right in there. And basically this is going to create a scattering system. We're going to change the absorption depth here. We're going to change this to a 5000. And the scattering scale is pretty dense. So let's actually change this to a zero point 0.1. And you can see when we do that, it's pretty crazy. There's a lot of fog going on in the scene. But you can see as it's starting to render here, you start to see what the effect really is. And this is basically how you create a realistic fog scene inside of your scene. So if we take the light here, we change it to a spot lamp, let's just say, and pull it up over here like this. And let's actually take the scattering scale and put it down to a 0.05. That'll be a little bit easier for computational speeds. And we'll change this to an auto step size. And you can see right here, it always says that, but I always turn it on anyway, just in case. So you can see if I turn off my overlays here, that the lighting effect here, you can see that cone. And that is basically the volume scatter from this scattering scale right here. And you can always throw, like I showed you, an image map in here to change how it's scattering and all that if you wish. But this is basically how you create that kind of scene. You can change this to a 0.01 to make it a little bit easier. And you can have a sort of effect like that. So really cool effects that you can do there. Change the absorption here to a different color if you want. Change the absorption distance to like 100 or something like that. You can color your scene. You can add fog. You can do all sorts of things just by adding this volume here. So let's say that you've added this volume effect here and it's taking forever to render and you can't really see your scene and you really don't like what's going on here. Really, all you need to do is just add a new volume, a clear volume, and throw it into here. You can't necessarily just hit the little X button that says unlink because it really doesn't work properly. And what you can always do is you can make two different volumes, one that's your final render volume and one that's for your checking shading and lighting and stuff like that. You can change that and you can add that and then change those right down here if you want. But this is really the easiest way to do it is just throw in a clear volume and there you go. Okay, so one more thing that I want to show you guys is how to quickly create a fire and smoke volumetric shading. And this is going to be a very basic way of doing this. I'm not going to show you all of the details on, making a really good fire simulation or anything like that. I'm just going to run through this very, very basic setup for you. So if you just click on the monkey head here, hit F3, and type in quick, you'll see quick smoke. So click that and it's going to make this sort of bounding box here. So this is your volume domain, the smoke domain up here. So if you click on the head and go over to this right here, which is the physics properties, you'll see here it says flow type under settings, flow type smoke, change that to fire and smoke, and then click back on your smoke domain. And what we'll do here is let's go ahead and open that up. So in here, change the I'm going to do this. I'm going to change this to a 64 just so it's a little bit more detail. And I'm going to click on this noise button right here. And what we'll actually do is we'll take this back down to a 32. That should make this run a little bit faster. Hit play. So basically we're getting a playback of the settings that we have here. And it's sort of like building the cache as we play through it here. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, play through to about here, and I'll show you a basic volumetric setting. So if we click on our smoke domain, and then go over to the material properties, and over here you'll see a thing right here that says fire and smoke. So go ahead and click on that. And it's going to show this right here. It says pointer to fire and smoke volume. And this is the same sort of thing as we did before with the environment. You'll need to click here. You can click this show, or you can go here to LuxCore volume nodes and click on fire and smoke volume right here. And you'll see that it's already created this setup right here. And I'm not going to show you the more complex one that I showed in the beginning of the video or on the thumbnail of this video because that requires its own sort of tutorial to prepare that. But if you go here and you change this to rendered view, you can see that now you have a smoke and fire volume shading that's already there. Now, you can use some tricks and techniques to make this a little bit more detailed and change up how thick the volume is here by changing the scattering scale, let's say to a 1 instead of a 10, or 150 if you want to make it super thick. And you can change the absorption, you can change the coloring, all that kind of stuff that we did before. You can change the emission colors here by changing this to, let's say, a 10, this multiply right here, and you can get an effect like that. So basically, to get a really nice smoke simulation, you need to, it's sort of a mixture between how you are using these values, this color ramp, and how you're setting up all of this here. And you can see here that auto step sampling is already on, so you want to make sure that's on there. You can turn on multi-scattering if you'd like, and you can see how it changes the way that everything is being rendered here. If I take that off, you can see how dark it is. If I turn that on, you can see that it's shooting more of the particles through the. It's basically calculating more rays inside of that um, volume there. So it's basically a mixture between how you shade it with these properties here. You could do some custom shaders to make it a little bit more detailed and different, like you saw in the intro to this video. But also, it's the settings that you do here. You'd want to probably increase your resolution divisions here, and you'll probably want to change the upres factor here, and all sorts of things, which I'm not going to really go into in this one. But basically, this is how you can get a really quick fire simulation. Uh, Shaded and throw some materials on it to see how that would look. So that's going to be it for this tutorial series. I hope that you learned quite a bit on how to use these different volume shading techniques on how to make whatever it is that you're looking to make, whether it's a plastic or a smoke simulation or fire, or just to add some environment effects to your scene. Please make sure to like and subscribe the video and go ahead and join us on the Discord. And if you have any questions or anything, you can get in touch with me there. And I will see you guys next time on DJ Tutorials.